late February, and I decided to leave Nottingham for a spell in order to visit the Welney Wetland Centre, one of 9 sites across the UK owned by the Wildfowl and Wetlands Trust and set on a stretch of wetland known as the Ouse Washers. Under normal circumstances, when looking out at the main observatory at Welney Wetland Centre, the landscape would have looked very much like it does on this map which I have in front of me now. It would have been a series of small lakes and channels surrounded by reeds and vegetation. But we have had a very, very wet couple of months with quite a lot of rain. So when I went, it looked like this. The water levels had risen to the point where almost all of the hides across the reserve had been completely flooded. Not to mention it was also extremely windy, which stirred up the waters into jagged, choppy swells. But that certainly didn't put off the pochards, who were hanging around right outside the window. Pochards are a species of duck that dive beneath the water for their food, and they usually only visit the UK for the winter to feed, spending the summer months in Scandinavia. The vast majority of the pochards here were males, recognisable from their sleek reddish-brown heads. Female pochards have a much more drab coloration, but most of them will have flown much further south. The males usually hang back in the north so that when the time comes to return to their breeding ground, they will get there first in order to build their nests and prepare for the females to arrive later. Mixed in amongst the pochards were tufted ducks and mallards, along with the occasional coot. Although, not all of them were purebreds. Different duck species are sometimes known to hybridize with one another.
There's a rather unusual looking mallard out there. Most mallards have a bright yellow bill, but this one seems to have a slightly blue one. It seems like the other ducks don't like him very much.
But it wasn't the ducks I was here to see today. I was here for swans.
When most British people think about a swan, they're probably picturing a mute swan in their heads, which is the one with the bright orange beak and the little black bulge at the top of it. The mute swan is known as the mute swan because it is mute in flight. It doesn't make a single noise except for the wind rustling through its feathers, which doesn't really count. And they are a British resident that can be seen throughout all the year. No matter the weather, no matter the season, the mute swan will always be about. But the other 2 species of British swan, those are very much winter migrants. They only come here to feed during the winter because in the places where they breed during the summer, it would be much too cold during the winter times. The hooper swans have come here all the way from Iceland. And since there's no land between Iceland and the UK, they have to make that trip in one go, including their 4-month-old cygnets. That is an astonishing feat for such a young bird. The hooper swan gets its name because of the distinctive call that it makes. They're not making any right now, but they should hopefully do so when the sun goes down, because that's usually when they're at their noisiest. And the 3rd species of British swan that we get is the Buick swan. The Buick swan and the hooper swan look very similar to one another, but the Buick swans, they breed in the Arctic Circle in Russia. So they've actually come from even further away than the hoopers. If you take a look at the hooper swan, you'll see that the yellow on its beak extends in a wedge shape right past its nostril. If it was a Buick swan, it would be a much more rounded shape and it would stop at the nostril. It wouldn't go any further. I don't think there are any Buick swans around at the moment. I think I've come too late for them because it's been quite a mild winter, so most of them will probably have already set off back to Russia.
Every winter, the staff at the Welney Wetland Centre conduct periodic swan feeds, which they diligently forged ahead with even despite the high waters and the whipping winds. Unfortunately for the first one I witnessed, only a few mute swans decided to brave the surf for the event. Perhaps I would have better luck at the next one, so I killed time watching the other birds that frequented the area, like this handsome pheasant. And I had never seen reed buntings this close up before. Three hours later, the wind had died down somewhat, the sun had set, and the hooper swans were coming in to roost. Very, very loudly. Though these birds spend the day feeding out on the fields, they spend their night sleeping on the water, floating peacefully in the knowledge that no land predator can hope to catch them while they slumber. Watching them glide across the dark waters like noisy ice sculptures, illuminated in the hide's floodlights, was a very serene experience. One thing is for sure, I intend to return here next winter. But next time, I will be here much earlier, perhaps December or early January. And hopefully, we'll have a much colder winter, drawing thousands of all three British swan species into these waters. Mutes, hoopers, and next time, Buicks too. Wouldn't that be something?